Kevin Demoff, president of Kroenke Sports and Entertainment. Thanks for being here with us today.
It's great to be here. Wish we were playing, but this is a good consolation prize.
I know the feeling. So not playing, but still in the news. Rams headed to Australia next season. Curious, the impact of that game, kind of that opportunity. Walk me through it.
Look, so it was Super Bowl last year when we announced that we would be the home team for the NFL's first ever game in Australia and Melbourne. Today announced that we're hosting the 49ers, biggest rivalry we have, although Rams-Seahawks might be starting to get close now. But what a great game to export to Australia for the first time. And I think two West Coast teams, cities Australian fans know well, taking a rivalry to kick off the NFL season, likely week one. But it's twofold. One, for us, it's about taking a great rivalry game to Australia and showing people the passion of that game. Two, it's also about making sure that two huge brand name teams in the NFL can show and give Australia that great lift. Like if you're going to go play a first game in a country, I think as a team and as a league, you have an obligation to do the best you can. And taking one of the best rivalries, I think every year, the past few years, Rams-Niners has been a primetime game. Yeah. So you are taking a great rivalry with great fans. Two teams are in the playoffs deep. What a great way to kick off the season, and hopefully we'll treat Australia to a show with the Rams winning at the end.
How big is this in terms of kind of the cycle of NFL international expansion? It's obviously a new market representing a big step. I'm curious kind of how you see this one relative to what's happened so far.
Well, look, I think every time the NFL goes somewhere new, be it Madrid, be it this year in Rio, going back to Mexico City, Germany, I think what's unique about Australia is the length of the trip, right? And so I think for us, proving that it can be done and be done well, that the athletes can play well, they can recover, is going to be huge as you think about playing games, be it in the Middle East, in Africa, in China, Japan, Korea, some of those places that are longer flights. Because, look, Australia won't work as a destination if it's just West Coast teams that are playing. At some point, you're going to have to start to take teams from the Central Time Zone, from the Eastern Time Zone. And if we can prove that we can do it successfully through the travel to play the game, play it well, I think that'll be a great step for the NFL to start to push beyond the 9-10 hour flights and the longer ones that really are going to be needed to choose new destinations.
Looking ahead to next season, the Super Bowl is coming back to SoFi Stadium. I'm curious, what's going to be different this time? How is Super Bowl at SoFi 2.0 going to kind of improve upon the last one, other than the Rams winning?
I hope it's not different at all. I want to run it back. Rams-Bengals, Rams win, great halftime show. Do it all the same again, right? Like, I don't know that you can top the last time. Look, I think for us, anytime you get to host the Super Bowl again, the learnings from the first time, how we can make it better, how we work with the NFL. I'm really excited. The new ESPN partnership, they are now next door to SoFi Stadium, taking over the NFL Network building. So Disney's first Super Bowl in decades, partnering with them not only at Hollywood Park and SoFi Stadium, but what can we do in Burbank to bring in the Valley? What can we do to Disneyland? How do we work together over the next year to create that drumbeat? How do we learn from the World Cup this summer about bringing the world to Los Angeles, to SoFi Stadium to get better? How is Hollywood Park and that district around it that wasn't built when we hosted the last time? How can that credibly bring fans in pregame during the week? So many things have changed over the past 5 years. Hopefully LA is better at hosting events. The other thing people forget, that last Super Bowl, it was the first event post-global pandemic, right? And so even as though we thought about, hey, people don't think about it's COVID, November, December, the Omicron virus crops up. Is it safe to go to a large stadium? Is it safe to travel again? I am hopeful between now and next year, no global pandemic, and people can start to plan and go have a great time in LA. And when I flew up yesterday, it was 85 degrees, perfect weather, no traffic. The Rams hoisted in Lombardi. Sounds great.
It's not just the Super Bowl, though. There's a crazy run going for SoFi Stadium. World Cup, Super Bowl, Olympics. How are you thinking about it, not just in terms of kind of a singular event, but this wide-stretching run that could really kind of define how this venue is used?
Well, I think back to when Stan Kroenke bought the land and wanted to build SoFi Stadium. He said you can't undershoot Los Angeles, and we should bring the greatest global sporting events back to LA. The Super Bowl hadn't been there in 30 years. Obviously, the Olympics coming back, after 50 plus years, the World Cup coming back 30 years later. But for us, it's about when people turn on the first match of the U.S. in the World Cup, it's going to be at SoFi Stadium, and what that means to our country. The Super Bowl, one of the biggest sporting events in the world, and then obviously the Olympics, the biggest sporting event in the world. First U.S. match, SoFi Stadium. Opening ceremonies, SoFi Stadium. Closing events, basically swimming, closing out the Olympics in 28, and a Super Bowl in between. I think that's where we look at it as people LA, SoFi Stadium becoming synonymous with the world's greatest events, and LA as not only the entertainment capital of the world, but truly the sports and entertainment capital of the world.
So, kind of pivoting to Stan's broader portfolio, he has some of the most valuable sports teams in the world, led by the Rams. I'm curious, how does the KSE portfolio, how do the teams in there kind of help each other? How do they lift each other up? What synergies are you able to exploit by having all these different teams in different leagues together?
Well, look, you're trying to find similarities, right? Sean McVay and Mikel Arteta have developed this great relationship where they trade ideas. How do they spend more time with injured players? How do you lift a team up, out of a tough loss? I think you look at, even this year when we made a change with the Nuggets at head coach and GM, following a very similar model, younger coach and David Adelman that we did with Sean McVay, that we did with Mikel Arteta, that we did it with Jared Bednar. We just hired a new manager at the Rapids who we hired from Tottenham, very young, aspiring coach. I think it's sharing some of the same DNA. We do a summit each year. We bring in all the teams together just to trade ideas about how do you think about talent versus character in the draft? How do you weigh that? How do we get better at analytics? How do we share information? We had a wave of hamstring injuries at the Avalanche last year. Uncommon in hockey, very common in football, making sure that our trainers are talking to each other about how we grow. Those are the ways we always think about trying to connect the dots of maybe there's a problem that has popped up for the first time in the NBA or NHL or MLS that we've seen somewhere else in the system, and making sure those people are communicating. It obviously starts with my role as president of the teams, but if you're doing it right, every person from a video department to an equipment department knows their counterpart, and if they have a question, they can go ask. In sports, we're all peers, we're all friends, but we're also rivals. There's a limit to how much information you ultimately do share with even your closest friends and other teams. There are no boundaries with that within the KSE portfolio, and I think that that's what's such a great opportunity.
Yeah. Now, Stan, to not understate here, is quite the landowner too. Does the land play any impact, or are there things you can leverage there as well, or?
I think when you have a tough loss like we had against Seattle and you want to go out to a ranch and just be around nobody, I think it's great to be the largest landowner in the U.S. and be like, I don't want to see a soul. So when we leave here, I hope to go to one of the ranches in Montana, not watch the Super Bowl and just sit there and look at the stars. But look, I think ultimately Stan has been an amazing grew up his career through real estate, passion for competing and building great sports teams. You see that intersection of play, whether it's growing at Hollywood Park, whether it's our new practice facility in the 100 acres we bought in the Valley of Los Angeles, for the Rams, whether it's the new development around Ball Arena that we're looking to do in River Mile and some of that in Denver, whether it's Dick's Sporting Goods Park and Victory Crossing. It is the intersection of sports and real estate where I think we have been leaders in that forefront from the beginning, and hopefully we continue to be that way.
Well, let me ask you, because now any sports project, there's always a mixed-use thing attached to it, something that nature. How are you thinking about going forward? I mean, obviously, Stan has been an innovator in that space, but how do you then take that to the next level beyond what's already been accomplished?
Look, I think those are the things where you talk about your lessons learned. What did we learn at Hollywood Park that we can transport to Ball Arena? Should we ever consider a project in London? What did we learn that we can take there around Emirates Stadium? I think it's always about what types of events do well. YouTube Theater, which is attached to SoFi Stadium, is hosting the NBA Tech Summit next week. That small venue, can we replicate that in Denver, around Ball Arena to bring in those types of shows? I think you're always, what can we learn from a hotel, from Cosm, one of the first Cosms that was built at Hollywood Park? Is that a credible, something that can go to London, to go to Denver?
Jeb Terry was just here.
I saw Jeb. You can't miss Jeb.
You can't miss him.
I was with the Buccaneers when we drafted Jeb in the 5th round, so far better entrepreneur than right guard.
Okay.
But, I think it's sharing, it's learning, but also, how do you build, how do you grow, how do you think about what's the right apartment mix? How do you make these places vibrant 365 days a year? And one of the advantages we have because of Stan's background, we're not outsourcing those projects to someone else. We're running them, 100% ownership, 100% vision. I think that gives us a little bit more nimbleness as we move through.
Yeah. So looking at the portfolio, obviously, not that there's a laggard, but the Colorado Rapids and MLS are kind of the lower end of that group. I'm wondering, how can you bring the Rapids up to speed? How do you elevate them to a level that one day chases Arsenal or the Rams or the Avalanche or the Nuggets?
Well, I think one of the things, when I took on this role at KSE, the Rapids had underperformed the other teams. I wish that wasn't the case. Obviously, we're fortunate enough, a Lombardi Trophy, a Stanley Cup, an NBA Finals in 16 months. Arsenal has had a great run. The Rapids haven't seen that. But I think it's the DNA of bringing that knowledge to the Rapids. And so whether it's signing a young U.S. men's national team player like Paxton Aronson, that's our Puka Nacua, it's our Bukayo Saka, it's our Nikola Jokic, Nathan McKinnon, right? A homegrown young guy you can grow with. Matt Wells, our new manager, fits in the Mikel Arteta, Sean McVay role. I don't think we had done that before with the Rapids. It's not that ownership wasn't involved or invested, but how do we take the DNA of our teams? You know, whether it's how we choose managers, how we choose GMs, how we draft and develop, and how do we bring that secret sauce to the Rapids and bring them into the ecosystem to share from the halo of KSE. But it's also very different. If you look at, you know, MLS, it is true that it is not the league where the best players in the world play. And so how do you become a draft and develop team? Can we strengthen the pipeline to the EPL through Arsenal to go develop? You know, are you taking players? We had a Moise Bombito who went to Nice last year, Georgi Mihailovic who went to Toronto. How do we become a place where we can develop young talent and then place them in Europe, place them in South America while making the Rapids better along the way? How do we change the fan experience to mimic what we see at Ball Arena, to mimic what we see at SoFi Stadium? I think the MLS has so much growth and opportunity in front of it, and the Rapids can play a huge part of that. Denver's a terrific soccer market. It's a terrific city, sports city, fandom. And so for us, it is how do we start to think about the Rapids along par, not just with those teams, but using the learnings from the other teams and placing them at the Rapids and using that to grow.
Well, how are you thinking about kind of the next frontier for team valuation growth, and specifically with the Rapids? I mean, you know, obviously there are great kind of tailwinds in the other sports, but MLS has a lot of changes coming down the pipe. The Apple changes, the schedule change, World Cup, you know, specifically impacting that. How do you think about those changes coming to the league and how the teams are going to appreciate?
Well, look, I think you take, you know, increased exposure with Apple, the World Cup, but I also think look at the biggest markets, New York, you know, NYCFC building a new stadium, you know, in the heart of New York. You know, New England Revolution building a new stadium in the heart of Boston. Chicago Fire building a new stadium in the heart of Chicago. Dallas refurbishing their stadium, Toyota Stadium in Frisco. When you look at Miami, new stadium. Biggest markets getting new stadiums is transcendent for MLS. When we talk about those mixed-use real estate bringing fans into the heartbeat of the city, I think you're going to continue to see that grow. Obviously, LAFC has had tremendous success building in the heart of LA. And I think it's more about MLS not only growing those stadiums, growing that experience, making people fans, but we also have to figure out a way to make the games available to our fans more, right? As an Arsenal fan, I can turn on my TV on Saturday morning and watch the EPL in one click. We have to make it so that the MLS is as easily findable as the EPL, as La Liga, so that there are as many jerseys, not just of Messi, but how do we get a Paxton Aronson jersey on everybody in Denver? As much as you see a Ronaldo jersey or a Yamal jersey or Bukayo Saka or Declan Rice, that to me is the growth. But soccer really has unlimited potential in this country, not just because of the World Cup, but truly it is the most globally played game. But I also think, you know, if I'm looking at the MLS long term, how do we create better alignment with U.S. soccer from a developmental model, right? It is very expensive to play youth soccer, club soccer. How do we bring that to the masses so that anybody who wants to play soccer, it's not just travel soccer. How do we make middle school soccer and high school soccer just as valuable so that that can be a pathway, not just as a suburban sport, but truly anybody who wants to play soccer can, because that's going to be what ultimately grows soccer in this country, is building those pipelines and making those kids who grew up here not just want to be an NFL player, an NBA player, they want to be an MLS player as well.
Yeah. Getting up for Arsenal, it's got to be pretty early based in LA.
Oh, you know, getting up at Arsenal, you're always like, I really hope we're in some of those later 9 a.m. slots. The 5 a.m. ones, it's like, okay, if it's Man City, I might be getting up. You know, if it's the second round of the FA Cup, I might just record it and see what happens.
Yeah. Can you port the World Cup kind of impact in Los Angeles back to Colorado? You know, there's not many, you know, sports owners who have kind of those dual market connections.
Sure. I mean, look, it's unfortunate that Denver didn't get one of the World Cup cities. Understand why. But, you know, for our season ticket holders of the Rapids, can we get them access to SoFi Stadium? Can we find ways to connect them? Obviously, I serve on the World Cup host committee in LA with the Galaxy, with LAFC. It's a little bit different. I'm always like, yeah, don't forget about the Rapids. You know, how do we make sure they get the same access? But I think for Denver, it's how do we make sure those fans can go experience, whether it's in Kansas City, whether it's here in San Francisco, whether it's in Seattle, whether it's in LA, to make sure they have that connection. But I also think it's trying to align, Arsenal's played at SoFi Stadium a few times. How do we get someone who's a Rapids fan to credibly watch the US opener against Paraguay and say, that's our owner's building. We're attached to this somehow, the same way I hope all Americans are when they watch the US take the field for the first time, on June 12th, that they feel pride that SoFi Stadium, I've always talked about, I want SoFi Stadium to become the Wembley Stadium of soccer in the US. That is where the best matches are played, the US national team loves to be, and that credibly it's what gets exported to the rest of the world.
Not that Stan needs it, but how are you thinking about institutional capital going forward across the portfolio?
Look, I always, I find the valuation game interesting because Stan's never sold anything in his life, so I don't see institutional capital, being part of it. But look, we're all competitive. And one of the ways you want to compete is by valuations. How do you get a higher valuation? You win more games, you drive more revenue, you drive to the bottom line. You grow your brand internationally. I look at valuations as just an extension of the standings, right? Maybe someday Stan decides he wants to sell, it'll be more than that. But for now, for us, I look at it when we moved to Los Angeles, we were 31st in the NFL in valuation. We're now second. I say we're second to, the Cowboys, which is a little bit like silver medal to Katie Ledecky. You're in the pool, but, she's done and you're still swimming.
Yeah.
But how do we go catch the Cowboys, right? Like that, to me, when I look at the next 10 years in Los Angeles, in 2036, can we become the most valuable franchise in the NFL? Maybe in the world. How do we go think about those things? Your valuation is reflective to me of how well you run your organizations, the opportunities you create and how well you take advantage of them. And for that, I do view that as, something that you want to go compete with across the board.
Kevin Demoff, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.